and welcome to Journey to Justice. I'm Eiko Kosasa, your host. This is the second of a two-part interview with Kat Brady, coordinator of the Community Alliance on Prisons. Let's listen in.
Every crime has a set of circumstances.
Yeah.
Every person has, a background that that they come from. And when we start doing things like setting mandatory minimums or 3 strikes laws, what we're saying is we don't care who you are. We don't care. We're going to just decide that you do this, that's what you get. And, my first reaction to that was, why do we have a judiciary then? Judges are there to look at the circumstances of a crime, the person who's before their bench, and make a reasoned decision about what the penalty should be for that crime. And yet what we have is this disproportionate, the sentences that we levy are disproportionate to the crime. I was working with a woman who went back to prison for a parole violation for selling a $40 bag of something and got a 10-year sentence. And I'm thinking, oh my God, people who murder get out before that.
Yeah.
Something is so wrong, and we're paying for that.
Yeah.
So, it's like we have a theft statute that anything over $300, so if you steal $301 worth of something, you can go to prison for 5 years. And I'm thinking, okay, so even if you go for 1 year, you steal $301 worth of something, and the taxpayer gets dinged for $46,255
a year. Yeah, for 3.
That's for 1 year.
Yeah.
That's totally disproportionate. So I tried to change that this year, and I've been trying for many years to up the theft statute, because I did a landscape view several years ago to see what do other states do, and we're at the low end. We haven't changed that threshold since 1986.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, things have really changed. An iPhone costs $600. I mean, this is nuts, right?
Yeah.
So I tried, and I've tried for many years, but this year I tried a different tactic.
Okay.
I went on the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I used their inflation calculator. And I said, in 1986, $300, what is that worth in 2012? It went up to 2012. $628.45. So I tried to up the statute to $750, and then, we'd have a little wiggle room, but not to go below $628, right?
Yeah.
I could not move that bill out of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Wow.
They just didn't want to hear it. And it was mostly one particular senator who said, I'm sorry, this hurts small business. And I said, and my response to that was, small business has insurance. And they raise the prices, and they're covered by insurance. On the other hand, the taxpayer has no insurance.
That's right.
So for $301, they get reimbursed by their insurance company, and we get dinged for $46,255. Where is the fairness in that? And I couldn't get any traction. And, I looked at other states. Many states adjust their theft rate every several years according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics inflation calculator. So, I mean, it's not like I was coming out of left field.
Yeah. Yeah.
And other places, the rates go from, the threshold goes from $200 in the very lowest state to $3,000. And a lot of states are moving toward, 1,000 to 2 because of inflation.
Right.
And
right.
yet Hawaii, it's really hard to believe that blue Hawaii, tolerant Hawaii, progressive Hawaii has turned purple.
Yeah.
We're really becoming quite conservative, and it's been very disturbing to me because there's been all these economic studies that have come out that have actually shown that since the economic crash in 2008, the people in the 1% have just, their wealth has been gaining, and everybody else has just been, either stagnant or dropping.
That's right.
And something is very wrong.
But it's amazing that the lawmakers, they don't, obviously it's politics. For $300 to $46,000, and money is tight, supposedly, why that wouldn't be a no-brainer. Yeah, let's up it.
I thought it was pretty compelling.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just one of those things when you work at the legislature, one of the things that I've always wanted to practice, and it's taken me a while, is patience. Because it's not just instant gratification. I like to see movement. And working for the community at the legislature has really taught me patience.
Yeah.
Because it's the movement, and this is another reason it's so hard to organize. The movement is kind of glacial. When you really look at it, the movement is really small. Small things happen that we're moving a little forward, but we're really inching along, rather than making, those great leaps that we really need to do, that legislators in the 70s did in Hawaii. We had a very progressive legislature who, in many cases, were pushing things that they personally did not agree with. But they really understood that their job as policymakers was to look at the greater good. And that is something, we have a very small number of legislators, I would say now, who actually look at the greater good. Most of them look to get reelected.
Yeah.
And it becomes this sort of, I get elected, now I got to work on my reelection. And I remember 10 years ago a legislator saying to me, "Kat, I can't do that. I need to, I need to get reelected to do the good work." And I remember saying, "Excuse me, you were elected to do the good work."
Plus, you're never going to get there if you're just working on your re-election.
So that to me is a huge problem, and our election system is broken.
Yeah, definitely broken. Yeah.
And I think until we really start, until the public, sometimes things have to get really worse before they get better. And I think we're getting to the point where things are getting really bad.
Yeah.
The Hawaii that we have now is not the Hawaii that I knew 30 years ago, and I know you grew up here, and it's not the same.
Yeah.
And it's really heartbreaking to people who have a social justice mind, who really believe that we're one community, and that in a community you have a whole variety of people. Some people that you're really proud of, some people you're kind of ashamed of, but we're all one community. And how do we deal? And we all come from families. And, we have people in our families that were like, "Ooh, why did you do that?" But you know what? There are families.
Yeah.
And until we really start realizing that we're one family, we're one community, things will not get better. So my plea to people is understand that we're all connected. That, there are more things about us that are similar than are dissimilar.
Yeah.
And, we need to start focusing on that, rather than nitpicking the things that we don't agree with. Because, it goes back to why I love texture. when everything is the same, it's really boring. My mom used to make me eat cream of wheat, and I was like, oh, that is just so bland and boring, and I wanted to put something in it to give it a little oomph. And I just think a society where everybody is in lockstep, I mean, look around the world, that,
That's what we don't like.
we don't want that.
Yeah.
That's totalitarianism. That's dictatorship. When people have diverse opinions, you come up with better outcomes.
Yeah.
Because you
Yeah,
have this conflagration of ideas that are, sometimes really conflicting, but can spark something really wonderful. So, to me, I guess I've always looked for the differences, because that's where the real innovation comes from.
Yeah.
So I guess that's why, as a Caucasian, I'm so interested in the Hawaiian sovereignty movement and in the independence movement, because it's about justice.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny how we can't raise the theft statute, yet we can ignore the fact that another country came in and took over Hawaii. Yeah. And then they lied and said the land was ceded. And it's like, no, that means to give. The land was seized. And yet people don't make that connection. And I think it's so funny how people can sort of compartmentalize and say, well, this is bad, but we're just not going to talk about that other thing. And it's like the 800-pound gorilla in the room.
Yeah.
And it's like everybody's looking around it, but not at it.
Yeah.
So, these are the kinds of things that just make me go, how did they do that? I'm not very good at being compartmentalized.
But that's good. That's what I'm always telling my students. You got to link things, what are the implications?
And that's, I think that's been my whole, through my, studies and everything, I've always looked at how things are connected. And yet, working with government agencies has been quite interesting, because everybody works in silos.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, this is my bowl of rice, and I'm, I got to worry about that, rather than looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
So, in that respect, several years ago, Community Alliance on Prisons started looking into justice reinvestment.
Yes.
And it was kind of interesting, because it was something that I used to call repurposing money. And I started in the 90s saying, what if we took some of the money from incarceration and actually built community programs to deal with people's pathways to crime, like drug treatment, substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment. Mm-hmm. What if we put money there? And they said, oh, Kat, you just really don't understand how things work. It's not that simple. Well, then around 2005, the Council of State Governments, which is this nonpartisan nonprofit, came up with this idea of justice reinvestment. Mm-hmm. And I thought, how interesting. It's repurposing with a kind of fancier name. And the first place they actually worked was Texas, which is red and had 162,000 people in prison and 9 prison construction projects on the books.
Wow.
And how did they get to Texas? They were invited in by the super right wing, because these legislators realized what we're doing is we can't sustain this. Mm-hmm. And so they asked Justice Reinvestment to come in. And what Justice Reinvestment does is they send in a team of analysts that look at, all the data from arrest through reentry. Mm-hmm. And they make recommendations, and then they help with legislation. And in 2007, the first year that it was enacted, Texas saved $443 million.
Wow.
So a friend who, Carrie-Ann Shirota, who was a Justice Fellow, met somebody from Justice Reinvestment, and she put me in touch with them. She brought it to Community Alliance on Prisons and said, we should really be looking into this. So we had several phone calls, and at that time we had a Republican governor. And I said, they said, would you like to invite us in? And I said, yes, but not yet. Not yet. In 2010, I think we'll have a new administration that would be more amenable to this. So I had mentioned Justice Reinvestment in my 2009 Smart Justice paper. And when Representative Abercrombie was running for governor, I talked with his staff, and I made sure that he got copies of the Smart Justice paper so that he would be familiar with that. And then around June of 2010, I asked the chairs of public safety in the House and Senate if they would write a letter to the Council of State Governments inviting them into Hawaii. And the way they work is they like it to be bipartisan, and they like to have all three branches of government involved. So around November of 2010, I called the Chief Justice and asked if I could have a meeting. And we met. It was me and a former dean of the law school and another community advocate. And we sat with the CJ for about an hour, and I left we talked about Justice Reinvestment. I left lots of information. And as we were leaving, the former dean said, Kat, nobody really meets with this CJ. And I was like, gee, why? He's really nice. Well, then Abercrombie got elected governor, and we started talking with the staff about Justice Reinvestment, and then found out that that the Department of Justice was so excited about Justice Reinvestment that they took it under their wing. And now it was in 14 different states working on different, Justice Reinvestment. So we realized that the governor was still putting his cabinet together. They'd never be able to get this, a proposal in time. So Community Alliance on Prisons actually drafted a proposal, and the state won the technical assistance grant. And for the very first time, 3 independent analysts from the Council of State Governments came in and looked at the entire criminal justice system. Because we had been talking about we need to do systems thinking. We've got to get out of our silos. We can't afford that anymore. We've got to really do systems thinking. And this was like an answer to our prayer. And they came in and they made a series of recommendations. And basically their findings showed that even though crime is at the lowest it's been in 30 years, Hawaii's prison population pretty much stayed stable at 6,000. What's going on? How could that be? And they wrote several bills, several bills were drafted. They put together a working group. We were not invited to be on the working group. It was mostly agencies. But we attended the meetings and we're kind of vocal. And I contacted the analysts and said, would you be willing to meet with advocates? And they said, yes. And the first thing they said when we met was, we've been doing this in 14 states. Hawaii is the first state where Justice Reinvestment was initiated by advocates.
Wow.
And this is really something. I mean, they were really stoked. So we put together a group of about 10 people, attorneys, academics, community advocates, the works. And we had about a 2 or 3 hour meeting to discuss what's really happening in Hawaii. And we told them Hawaii was very blue, very progressive, and that, we're changing. The demographics are changing, and we're all very concerned about this. We've turned into this very punitive society that's all about retribution, and it's not about healing, it's not about love, it's not about anything except you're bad, you're banished. And we just didn't see how that could ever produce anything that would be worthwhile for any of us. And they agreed, and we started working with them and testifying on bills that they introduced. And 2 bills did pass in rather weakened versions, but they did pass. And, we're continuing to try to strengthen justice reinvestment. But it's an educational process.
But the bottom line for the justice reinvestment initiative, what is it in simple terms on how does it save money for the community?
It basically, the goal is to reduce the population of the incarcerated and take that money out of incarceration and put it into community programs. So when the bills passed, the governor said, we don't have the money and I'm not putting any new money toward this. So the Department of Public Safety, which is the lead agency, actually took money out of the budget that was going to the corporate prisons.
Okay.
And they're putting out RFPs. Right now, we're in the very nascent stages. They have an implementation group, and they have like 3 levels, an on the ground level, a medium level, and then the policy level. And they're putting out RFPs, requests for proposal, to buff out community programs. So part of the plan was hire more probation and parole officers, get more people out on parole, stop sending people back for technical violations. People should only really go back when they commit a new crime. How do we actually deal with people who have trouble on parole? And of course, it's to strengthen parole, to strengthen services and support. That's what parole is supposed to be, and probation as well. Instead of looking under a microscope, I got you. It's saying, how can I help you be successful? How's your job? What can I do to assist you? So it should be more about support and help rather than this intensive monitoring. Because all of us living under a microscope, we would all be incarcerated at one point.
Exactly.
So,
so this is really like changing the perspective or view of
the whole philosophy of the system. Yes. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it just started here, right?
Yes, yeah. The bills passed in 2012. They're working on implementation right now. But it's, things take time.
Yeah.
And this year, some legislators have been saying, so what's the effect of justice reinvestment? And I'm thinking, you're a businessman. It's like you start a new trend and you think in 6 months you're going to actually have some worthwhile data. I mean, it takes time to, to grow these things. And I just find it rather interesting that there's sort of this, they're very patient with some things, but when it comes to justice, it's like, why aren't we seeing that change right now?
Yeah.
And it's like, because we're human beings and we're kind of complex.
It would be to re-educate all the people already in parole and the prisons to look at it different, like you're saying.
Yes.
Everybody's part of the same community.
Right.
Right? So it would take all their education.
Yes.
Right?
And that's why I've been pushing training, because, the people who are in prison right now, they're very different than the people who were in prison 20 or 30 years ago. ICE has really, I would say, the war on drugs has really changed the face of the communities and also of those who are incarcerated. So, where you had people who were not, who were criminals, some violent. We've always had kind of a low violent crime rate. Since ICE has come in, and we allowed it to come in and fester for 20 years before we even looked at doing anything about it, we have a generation that's lost. And how do we recapture that? And how do we keep their kids from following suit? So I do some work with juvenile justice as well, because I'm really concerned about, the next generation, and Hawaii has a huge intergenerational problem. I know a guy who was in prison 26 years, and he said, you know what, I know entire Hawaiian families. I was in prison with grandpa, with dad, and then with the grandson.
Wow.
And you just say, that is a social indictment.
Yeah.
And why aren't people outraged by that? A 90% jump in the prison budget in, a decade. Why aren't people screaming that their kids don't have books to bring home to do their homework with?
Yeah.
I just don't understand.
Yeah.
So these are the things that keep me up at night and keep me engaged, because there's not a lot of people actually speaking on this stuff. And I feel like, somebody has got to keep raising the issue. And when people say, oh, Kat, I'm so glad you're out there. And I'm like, well, help me.
Yeah, and when you're giving this bigger perspective, hopefully the viewing audience can see there's different levels in which they can engage, and they don't have to do exactly what you're doing, but in a smaller ways they can do other
Call
things.
your legislator.
Yeah.
Tell them mandatory minimums are counterproductive. All this research has come out showing long prison sentences, they don't really do anything. They don't deter crime. They actually up somebody's criminologic thinking.
Yeah.
And then their imprisonment impacts their wages, their ability to earn a living for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
Why are we doing that?
Yeah.
We'll all pay for that.
Yeah.
And if people, I think one way that things have really gotten off the rails is that people have been looking only in the silos, only at a single issue. And we're not like that. You need to look at how everything affects everything else.
Yeah.
And until we start connecting the dots, and I think that's why in some ways dangerous to some people, because I keep connecting the dots and I can't help myself because the economy, the educational system, it's all related.
Yeah. Yeah.
And life to me, justice is the umbrella under which we live.
Right.
And you can't just say, justice is only about prisons.
Yeah.
It's about justice in education, in the environment. It's gender justice. It's economic justice. It's
right. I know. Sometimes my students are saying, when I teach them that it's almost like, oh, this is like a conspiracy type of analysis. And I said, it's not a conspiracy when it's a system.
Yeah.
I says, men don't have to whisper to other men, oh, let's put the women down. I mean, it's just part of this whole thing, and they have to just realize it's a system that's keeping all these injustices happening.
Yes.
They have to, that's what I keep pushing in class.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear you saying this, because it is. That's what it's about.
Well, I'm glad you are influencing young minds, because I think that's really important, that people do connect the dots.
Yeah.
And it's threatening to the system when people do that, because it's much easier for them to get away with stuff by saying, look over there.
Exactly.
And to me, I always like to look where you're not supposed to look.
Yeah, look over there. We're always over here. Exactly, exactly. Is there anything else you would like to add before we end the interview?
Well, I want to thank you very much, Eiko,
you're
for
so welcome.
for this wonderful opportunity to talk to you and to the viewing audience, but also to say to everybody out there that justice is important for everybody, and that the day you stop caring about what happens to someone else, you have made a statement about what you think about yourself.
Oh, wow.
So care.
Yeah.
We're one community, one world, one family. And we need to care and love each other. We're Hawaii. Hey, Hawaii-o. Yeah, we are Hawaii. We care for and about each other. It's what makes us unique and special.